Hello out there in Geekland. Daniel here with Temple of Geek. And I'm just coming to you a little bit before the episode just to kind of give you a little bit of context about what today's episode is all about. We have two very special guests on today with us. The first one is Tatiana Pena, who's a cosplayer currently studying video game and animation. Tatiana is extremely passionate about the way cultural stories across media are told. Much of Tatiana's research has to do with diversity and how representation matters. Tatiana's post on Instagram was the reason for the inspiration of this episode. Our next guest is Paloma Figueroa. You may remember her from our diversity and fandom episode that we did, and most recently the fan reactions to Captain Marvel episode. Paloma is a diversity and inclusion consultant who loves talking about what's it like being a Latina fangirl in the world today, and what kind of impact representation in comics and media has on fans. So we thought these two guests would be perfect to talk about Tatiana's Instagram post. So I want to read what that Instagram post says so you have the whole backstory as to why we put together this episode. So here's that post. Blackface is becoming something more common in the cosplay community. With the rise of blackface comes the rise of people of color speaking out against it, both respectfully and from a place of pain and frustration. However, no matter how much we try to get people to understand and stop blackface, raceface, it continues strong. People that have done blackface, raceface may do it without knowing how offensive it is. And when issues are brought up to them, whether it be in the form of an attack or an informative dialogue, have noticed that they try to justify the wrongdoing and play victim rather than admit their wrongdoing and grow from their mistakes. Rather than try to understand why so many people are offended, they try to defend themselves. Of course, it is natural to defend yourself in situations like this, but perhaps you should start to listen and see past your personal beliefs. Understand this is from a person of color's point of view. Blackface is wrong is more than just an opinion. Blackface has a historical connotation that many fail to accept. Understand and take it into consideration when they decide to cosplay someone from another race. This post is meant to shed some light on those who may not understand what the big deal is. Well, that's the post. And now that you have the context, I believe it's time to start the episode. So, without further ado, go ahead and start that intro.
Enjoy the show. Beaming at you from the depths of the internet. This is the Temple of Geek podcast, your one stop for all things geek. All things geek.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Temple of Geek podcast. My name's Jose. I will be your host today as we talk about blackface and cosplay and why is it wrong. With me today is the cosplayer Tatiana, who recently wrote a very moving post of this subject. And returning to the podcast is Paloma. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being on with us today. Before we start, let's get a little description of both of you for our fans and followers. So, Paloma, would you describe yourself for us?
Yeah, of course. Hello, nerd family. My name is Paloma Figueroa, and I'm one of the newer members of the Temple of Geek team. I live and work in the Bay Area. By day, I work to make organizations safer, more diverse, and more equitable for folks as a diversity and inclusion consultant. By night, I volunteer, I travel, and I nerd out pretty hard from cosplay to fan fiction, doing my best to bring a spotlight to representation and inclusivity in fandom and pop culture.
All right, thank you. Tatiana, tell us about yourself.
All right. My name is Tatiana, and I'm a cosplayer. And outside of cosplay, I actually am a video game and animation student. And a lot of my research actually surrounds diversity in games and representation. So it's really good to actually be able to talk about this today.
That's great. Fantastic. So I came across your post you posted on Instagram. Read through it. It's very moving, very relatable. So my question is, what was your thoughts going through when you decided to post your thoughts on your Instagram?
So I was really, really quiet on the subject for a really long time because I felt like I wasn't ready to say what needed to be said. And I follow this Instagrammer, King Kitsu, and they're a huge, huge inspiration for me. And I joined one of their lives, and they were talking about yet another instance of this happening, and the response of so many people was of support of a blackface and cosplayer. So I felt like that was my time to like sit there, think about it, and write an informative kind of response to what's been going on rather than something that's been backed by a lot of emotion, like being angry about it. While I am angry about it, I felt like it was more important for me to take the informative approach and kind of open up a dialogue instead of start a fight.
What was like what's the action or the flow of, when you post the article? I'm sure you got a bunch of reactions or backlash. I'm guessing, or not backlash, but like comments when you post your article.
Yeah, so I posted it at like the wee hours of the morning, at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I wasn't really expecting on getting any kind of response, but like right away, I was backed with tons and tons of support. And as the day was going on, I was waiting for that one comment to just be full of hate. And it actually took a while before people were really nasty about it. More people were asking questions than, you know, being really, really mean about it, which was kind of my point, and I'm glad that it happened. But most of the people who supported me were also answering the questions of people in the comments when I couldn't, and then I started to get the backlash. And rather than feed into their hateful responses with more hate and disrespect, I would just answer their question and kind of like leave it at that. But yeah, so I got a lot of questions. I got a little bit of hate. Most of the hate was actually in my direct messages, but I could choose to ignore that or not. So I ignored most of it.
Do you have a specific comment that you really gravitate towards when you're reading through all the comments? There was any ones that sticked out to you the most?
The ones that stuck out to me the most were coming from people who didn't really want to learn. Where like I wrote all of this post, I wrote all of this in the post, and it was informative. It had dates. It had historical like context, and I was just thinking like this is it. This is what we needed. And then the comment that stuck out to me the absolute most was, well, I still don't get it. I don't think it's wrong, therefore it's not wrong. Or I'll get the comment that's like, well, I didn't do it to be mean, so it's not bad. And the only way I could respond is, you could do things with the best intentions and you could still end up hurting someone. It doesn't mean what you did wasn't wrong. It just means you made a mistake.
What do you believe is the importance to speak about this matter?
I feel like the more we talk about it, the more people will learn that this is an issue and it's always been an issue. And I guess, the more you raise awareness to any kind of problem out there, the same way it is with, cancer, and the same way it is with LGBT, the more we speak out about it, the more people know and the more supporters we can get. So it's like the more we can stand together and solve the problem as a collective, because we can't do it if people don't know.
I just want to jump in, and I really want to say thank you for your post and sharing your perspective and experience with followers, because I know that speaking up is tough, mentally, physically, spiritually, intellectually. I think a lot of people assume that putting oneself out there in this particular kind of way is just some kind of superpower you're born with, and you wake up one day and you grab a mic, and it's really not like that, at least in my personal experience. That might be true for some, but really it can take years of crappy experiences, years of repression, years of struggling to find your own voice. And I think that that's important to call out for those people who are still kind of in that process right now. And so often the burden of it falls on people of color and people, like individuals and groups who have experienced that marginalization in their own lives to do this work, and using your voice is powerful. But I think the important thing here is to impress upon our audience and our friends and anybody who listen about how important it is for not only, POCs and other marginalized groups to have safe and accessible platforms to speak about these things that affect the quality of our lives, but for allies and accomplices to realize the power and privilege of their positions in supporting this work. I think the idea of this fist in the air activism is a great weapon in this fight, but for an accomplice to step back, make space for, echo, and amplifying conversations and voices like yours on topics like this is as much a superpower that we've seen in fiction, the movies that we obsess about all the time. So I just want to say thank you for doing that.
Of course.
So what are best practices when cosplayers cosplay characters of different race? What are the best ways to celebrate the character of color and cosplay even though you're not the person of color?
Well, see, a lot of people feel like people of color are gatekeeping the characters of color, and we're not. I would just cosplay a person of color the same way you would cosplay someone who isn't. Make the costume. All I would do is just be very mindful of the things that make that character who they are. Do things in a respectful way. Don't change your skin tone. There have been people who asked me in my DMs, I want to cosplay this character. Am I allowed to do that without being racist? And I'm like, you're not racist. Right off the bat, it's first and foremost, thank you for coming and, asking the question. And, but you just don't change your skin tone. It's really, really simple. And, I know that accuracy is a big reason that people do blackface. I personally believe that cosplay is about fun and it's not about accuracy. While it may be important to some people, you just have to ask yourself, is your accuracy worth hurting an entire group of people? And if you feel that it is, then maybe you need to reevaluate a couple of things. Maybe you might not want to, do this in public because you're going to get backlash for it regardless. And it's not whitewashing if you're not a person of color and you're cosplaying a character that is of color. It's whitewashing when you take the important part of that character's culture and you get rid of it as if it's not important.
Plus one to everything you just said, especially the gatekeeping bit. I talk about it all the time. It's like my banner cause. Basically my approach to this is a little bit long-winded, so I warn you in advance. But I actually talked to a really good friend of mine. Her name is Kim Tran, and she teaches ethnic studies and actually engages on this specific discourse on a regular basis with their students. And so kind of in preparation for this, I asked her for her feedback, and she shared some articles, which I'm happy to link with this podcast when we go live. And she talks with her students about how, they ask her, how do we codify and quantify this exact question, which is basically what's the formula for what is or isn't racist? And in this particular case, how can I engage in amazing and appropriate cosplay and costuming? Here's looking at you, Halloween, every day. To be clear, I think this is something she says as well. There isn't a calculator where you can do some math and bam, you get a clear answer every time. Sometimes it is simple. Blackface and other race faces, wrong, don't do it. But there are a lot of not so obvious situations where you need to use your noggin and think it through. And she offered a really clear set of questions, kind of help you take a hard look at what you engage in. I'm not going to outline all of it because that's another podcast that I think would be hella long. But it fundamentally asks and actually expects you to do, as you said, do your due diligence, do an honest assessment about the what and the why behind what you're doing. in my opinion, as a socially responsible cosplayer, you've got to like not only look at what your intention is, more than this is a rad character and you'd look banging in that uniform, but also the impact of that cosplay in the world and on others. And that means looking at the culture and the identity and the experiences that character has had in their storyline and on those real people that character is drawn on. Ultimately, if you're there to engage in it for the grams of likes, which I get it, but have no interest in the history, good and bad, uncomfortable and eye-opening, and are not willing to support and engage or stand up for the hard topics related to those discussions outside of cosplay, then in my opinion, you got no right to stand for it. Beyond that, if the cosplay is rooted in a particular culture and kind of heavily reliant on kind of these deeply entrenched stereotypes or like a sacred social cultural cue that exists in our world, like a ceremonial headdress or a particular physical feature, the exact things that have led people in those particular cultures to have experienced centuries of persecution, move along. You cannot cosplay without relying on using tire-damaging stereotypes to tell the rich history of a particular character. Y'all got some work to do, and just move along. That's basically how I think about it.
Well, I couldn't say any more. That was actually really good. Tatiana, you posted about the blackface being wrong. You also gave a little bit of history about it. Can you go a little more detail about the history of blackface, how it started?
So, as far as American history goes, because I was actually having a conversation with a couple of my followers, and they taught me that blackface is a thing of many cultures, and maybe even older than what we know of in American history. So, as far as American history goes, basically in the early, I believe it was 19th century, maybe 18th century, Caucasian people specifically in the US would darken their skin tone with tar and other black paint, and they would overdraw their lips, and they would draw white lines under their eyes to kind of mock or imitate the features of a black person, and they would use that in theater to basically, become a black person in a play. And they would continuously mock a black person's behavior. They would act out these really, really cruel and dehumanizing stereotypes. And it became really, really popular. Like it was big, pretty mainstream. So as a result of that, these stereotypes that were acted out in theater became stereotypes that were associated with black people and people of color every single day. And while what is going on today isn't technically blackface, we use that buzzword because the context is there. So there were people who came into my inbox and said, "This is not blackface. You're stupid for blah 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 blah." The association is there, so that's the reason that we're using that. So in addition to that, a follower told me that people did this to people in the Middle East. They would paint themselves brown, and they would hypersexualize themselves as an Indian or Middle Eastern woman. And if you know anything about the culture, it's very modest. So to hypersexualize a woman, it's disrespectful. It's fetishizing them, and it was pretty relevant. That specific information was pretty relevant to what was going around the time I made my post. And in addition to that, there were people who told me that, people all over Europe have a history of blackfacing, and it's even common today for it to be happening in like traditional setting, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. To add upon that, I think that popularly minstrel shows, which is what Tatiana was talking about in terms of like the entertainment form of blackface, I cannot highlight more how this was a practice that was designed to mock and demonize dark-skinned and Black people. And while that is all but extinct, the practice still exists. And, whether blackface and cosplay is misunderstood by the cosplayer, I think it is still at its core a callback to a gross, harmful, and racist practice. And presently, like, Hollywood has a long, wildly problematic history of employing blackface in films as a way to allow white actors and actresses access to roles at the expense of, and again, I cannot stress this enough, their Black and brown counterparts. Hollywood is also likely responsible for taking what many would say is a disturbing part of our distant past, which is heavy quotation marks, and inoculating a newer generation of consumers on what is more often called, what Tatiana called, whitewashing in the media, and is largely, and I, again, can't diminish how effed up it is, but in my opinion, almost carries less of this shock factor and weight, in the general media that blackface elicits. If ScarJo is seen as whitewashing an Asian character, it's not going to have the same response as someone seen as doing blackface in a film, even though it's effectively very much the same thing. When I was doing research on this podcast, I read this article by Adam Howard of the Daily Beast about Hollywood's long history of blackface earlier this year and how it persists basically to this day. And in his closing comments, he said, and this sums up how I feel and how people should feel about it. And he basically said, blackface has been used to systematically dehumanize, degrade, and disenfranchise people by propagating the very worst stereotypes about Black people. So if you ever do it, you must understand that you're now part of that legacy, for better or for worse. And this is me speaking. Ignorance, accidental or otherwise, is not an excuse for partaking in this bigoted rhetoric that reinforces damaging stereotypes. Like, can't understand why people don't get that, but that's it. Full stop. End of story.
Yeah.
Wow, that's because I believe in certain parts of Europe they still do festivals, and that their main they still do blackface during these festivals. I don't remember what country that does these festivals. I want to say somewhere Polish.
It's either like Polish or Swedish. I'm sorry for the people in Poland and Sweden. I don't know which country it is, but it's like Northern Europe. There's a character that is blackface, basically. It's a Christmas
is it Krampus?
Tradition. What's
Krampus? Krampus, I think?
No. Krampus is a demon, but it's like a specific like blackface thing. Like, yeah, they will all paint themselves brown, and like that's the character. I can't remember what it is. But yeah, it's like they don't see what's wrong with that because they aren't taught. That has a really harmful historical background, and I feel like instead of attacking each other, we should inform people that this was a thing, and it's still kind of a thing. And as long as people of color and as long as people of color are still facing these issues in everyday life, it will be a thing, and we can't move on unless, we no longer have to fight to be seen as equals.
So what are your thoughts for the cosplay community when it comes to issues regarding race?
I honestly want more people asking questions. And when I say asking questions, I don't mean, in a really petty way or in a really harmful way. I legitimately want people to have a dialogue, not a conversation. So like a dialogue is basically something like, what we're having here. People are sharing their ideas, they're respecting where everyone is coming from, and they're not crossing boundaries, but, talking in between them. It's really hard to explain. It's one of those things that you have to see for yourself to understand. But I want more people to leave their comfort zone and, reach out to people and ask about the things that they don't understand. And they have to, I guess, accept that, you're not going to know everything about every culture. And if you want to experience something from another culture, you're not going to be criminalized for wanting to know more. Um, in fact, that's what we want you to do. We want you to ask. We want you to be considerate. We don't want you to just take something and do something that's disrespectful, even if you don't know that you're doing something disrespectful. It's just, I don't know, we just ask questions. Have an open mind. We're all here to have fun. We're all creatives. That's why we do what we do. And something that creatives should know is that your mind should be open to all kinds of possibilities. So it shouldn't be closed to this one.
Yeah. And as a cosplayer myself, I think something that really helps me and what I hope others are able to do is to rely on and explore our amazing community. Sort of similarly, there are great cosplayers out there navigating and speaking on these topics, like our amazing guest. Many of them are incredibly open and accessible to answering questions, like Tatiana said, and talking about some of your concerns. Some might not be, but either way, it costs nothing to seek them out, to follow them on social media, on their blogs, listen to what they have to say from their perspective. Not everyone is going to be open to interacting with you, and that's okay. That's their right. You may get some pushback from some people who are consistently asked to do this work for free and at their mental expense, or from trolls looking to just push your buttons. At the end of this, what I hope is that this gatekeeping that we keep talking about in our community doesn't undermine the creativity and the genuine love for these characters, like Tatiana was talking about. The multiverse of sci-fi and fantasy is so diverse and expansive and becoming even more so, and entertainment is only becoming more representative of that. And this unrealistic set of parameters some canon thumping nerd uses to keep us from exploring aspects of a character and ourselves through, appropriate and creative cosplay would really break my heart. But that doesn't, subvert the need to be thoughtful and be responsible and be educated about the decisions you make around it. And ultimately, the rule of thumb is if it feels wrong, if you have doubt about your cosplay choices, just don't do it.
And I just wanted to add a tiny little thing to that. So I'm a game design major, I'm an animation major, and something that we're taught in our class is if we are going to put anything in our projects or anything in our games or anything that we create, if we're going to put something in there that has some cultural weight, do your research before you even think about making an asset, before you think about animating it, before you even think about concept art. Do your research. I have professors that have worked on games and they've taken sabbaticals and gone to countries just to learn about the things and the concepts that they want in their game so that it's more accurate, it's more respectful, they know their boundaries, and when they come back, they make something that is not only beautiful and shares the culture that they wanted to express, but it's respectful of the culture that they're, sharing with the world. And it's that easy.
You would think.
No, it's easy. It's all about the mindset going in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's very interesting. I never thought of that. It's usually like when you play a game, it's usually I think it's like the story and just pretty much like the character. That's pretty much I never thought like actual like research going through the design of the character. My only two things is like if it's like a great story and has like good mechanics, that's pretty much it. I never thought doing all the thorough background checks or
I could teach you a couple of things.
So I guess my other question is, what are tips for like cosplayers that want to cosplay characters from movies, from TV shows, video games, or fantasy that are not they're from a different race? Do you have any tips or kind of like I guess like a guideline to help them out so they want to offend anybody?
I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. So you're asking about tips on just cosplaying things that are not familiar to you, or
Yes, whatever it's like not familiar.
oh well, I mean, something that I can share my process. Basically, if I wanted to cosplay someone from a video game that was very very different for me, I would do my research on the character. I would think about how they live, and I'm also a little bit obsessive, so so I might do just a little bit too much preparation. But I think about how they live, what they wear, why they wear it. You know, who are their parents if they have any. What kind of character they are. I like to look deep into the character, and if there's something there that relates to real life, if they're from a different culture, if they're say, from an Asian culture, I would want to design my cosplay in a way where the stitches would probably match the stitching of whatever historical period they're from. Um, it's all just in research. It's all in educating yourself on the character, on the media, and what that media was inspired from.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would add to that is, again, ask other people, get other perspectives. If you have an inkling that maybe this is if you're a little out of your depth with this particular cosplay or this character, you're unsure how the reception will be, ask around. It's like, there's Reddit, there's Instagram, there are tons of cosplay communities where you can put yourself out there, or even just message someone and say, hey, you've cosplayed this character, do you think this is appropriate? You might have to dig a little bit, or, message a couple people, but you will someone will respond, and hopefully in a productive way. And I think that that's really one of the best ways you can kind of temperature test what you're doing. And again, kind of back to what I said earlier about, like, if the cosplay is really heavily reliant on you looking and doing certain things and wearing certain things that are very, very much based in a stereotype, or like exaggerating a physical feature based on not your identity or race or culture, you don't have to do those things in order to get that across. There are probably other identifiable things about that cosplay, but if that cosplay is so deeply rooted in that, it'll, it's going to be tough to do that without feeling a little uncomfortable. And so you got to really do your due diligence about how you can get creative. I mean, I had a friend who did a Pink Panther, Black Panther mashup, because that was the best way that they could figure they could be a respectful, non-Black person doing a Black Panther cosplay. That I was like, that's the way to do it, because they felt like, yes, no one would really see them under the Black Panther suit because it's pretty much covering them, but they knew, and they wanted to respect all of the work that really went into developing Wakanda and like this particular, character that means so much to the Black community and to people of color in general. And so that was their way of doing it. There's so many ways you can do that. You just have to put more effort in. And I think if you're not willing to do that, it's going to be really hard.
I have a cosplay that I do. It's from Critical Role, a Dungeons and Dragons video cast thing. But the character is Gilmore, and he's very, very Middle Eastern, perhaps North African coded. And at the time, I was working at a fabric store, and I would get a lot of people from that neck of the woods shopping. And, I would ask them questions about, very specific kinds of clothing and what is considered taboo for me to wear. And then, I would introduce them to the character, tell them that he's a merchant and stuff like that. And I was able to create a cosplay that was really inspired by their culture and, Gilmore himself, and not be offensive. And I think if you really want to embody a character that much, you should also be willing to take that extra step and figure out what you can and cannot do.
So, any final thoughts or takeaway you want our listeners to know about the issue before we sign off?
So I guess for those of you who just listened to this podcast, congratulations, you made it through. But if you're thinking like, wow, I never knew any of this or even just didn't know the extent of it, I strongly recommend that you take a moment to do some knowledge gathering. We keep talking about needing to look things up, reach out to people. It really, at its core, is about like expanding your perspective. And I think it's really our most important, most valuable. And I keep going back to the superpower because I'm a big comic book freak. But don't allow the burden of the education to fall on someone else, particularly your friends and fellow, nerds of color, to provide that information. Follow blogs, listen to podcasts, sign up for Twitter or other social media, be uncomfortable, follow that thread to see why and where that discomfort is coming from when addressing and participating in these kinds of conversations, because these conversations are uncomfortable even for people who are used to engaging in them. What else? Unpack your behavior and make different decisions based on what you learn. I say this all the time because this is the work that I do, but we're all a little bit biased. It's primal, it's socialized. It doesn't have to be who you are or who you can be in the future. Once you've learned that it exists, and you can alter your behavior once, you've taken the time to really learn about it. And I think not relying on ignorance as an excuse is super important, because frankly, it's really lame and it's tired. And for those of you who've been doing this work all along, like Tatiana, thank you for being our own sort of Justice League, because with that great responsibility has come this amazing power, and it's not acknowledged enough. And that's a bummer. But, if it takes, these moments to do that, then, I'm happy to do it. And it's really an honor. So thank you.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off of what you said, for those people who are listening that didn't know anything about it, you now know. You can do some extra research if you'd like to see, because I can guarantee you everything that we said is not everything that exists about this topic. Talk to your friends about this, spread the word. The more people that know about it, the more we can fix this growing problem in the community. And, we're all here to support each other. So, the more that we argue about this, the more steps back we take as the cosplay community. And as someone who, I used to be a hermit, I used to be bullied and stuff like that. And when I started cosplaying, I saw nothing but love. And I feel like that doesn't need to stop. So we should know what it feels like to be dehumanized and to be hurt by the actions of someone else. So we shouldn't follow in those footsteps. We should be better than that, and we should learn from each other. I really hope that we can move forward with this.
Mm-hmm.
And to my people of color, stay strong, and we can all get through this. Spread the love, all of that good stuff. Hakuna Matata. A skin tone is not a costume. You may be able to wipe it off at the end of the day, but we can't. And we face a lot of issues that we didn't ask for, and other people benefiting from that. It feels awful. So I really hope we can move past this.
Great. Before we sign off, can you tell our listeners where can they go to find or how to follow you on your social medias?
Sure. I am Melanite Coscrafts. So MELANITE COS Crafts. That's me on Facebook and on Instagram. And I'm Melanite CC on Twitter.
And you can find me on Twitter at Paloma F. That's PALOMAF. And on Instagram at Sublime, like the band, Rubbish, like the British bin. One word, Sublime Rubbish. And you can also catch me on Temple of Geek.
that's going to be a wrap of this episode of Temple Geeks Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to hit us up on our Facebook or Twitter by using the handle Temple Geek. Do you want to check out some other episodes or shows? Why not you head over to TempleGeek.com. There you will find all sorts of content that pertain to the world of geek. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Please follow us on Twitter at Temple of Geek. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Temple of Geek. And remember to visit templeofgeek.com, your one stop for all things geek.
Goodbye.
This will conclude our transmission.